My name is Panama Bartholomew. I'm the executive director of the Investor Confidence Project, and you are in for a treat because we have an incredible panel up here today to talk to us all. Who here knows how many registered automobiles we have in California? Yell something out.
33 million.
We have 33 million vehicles registered. We have 27 million autos registered. Congratulations, you get a prize at the end. Fantastic. Last week, Governor Brown announced he wants 5 million electric vehicles in the state over the next few years. How is this going to happen? And most importantly, how do we turn all 25 million into electric vehicles moving forward, 27 million moving forward? How do we plan the charging infrastructure? How do we integrate that into our communities? As we move towards a more autonomous future for vehicles, how do we develop the plans and the changes within our communities? How do we integrate all the different mobility options for Californians moving forward? These are the questions that this excellent panel is going to discuss. Now, most of these people never get big applause. They don't. They're some of the hardest working people in your industry. I imagine they're in your industry because you're at this session. And no one ever gives them love like they deserve. And so what I'm going to ask is that today we give them the love they deserve. So I'm going to, fantastic. I'm going to introduce each one of them. And at the end of the introduction, if you could give them a big holler, whooping, yelling, round of applause for each one of these speakers. We'll give them the love they deserve. And frankly, when was the last time you got to yell professionally in a positive way as well? So we'll start it off with Commissioner Hochschild. David Hochschild is the environmental appointee onto the California Energy Commission. He oversees renewable energy at the California Energy Commission. He was the founder of Vote Solar, perhaps the most effective solar advocacy organization in the country. He worked for Mayor Willie Brown in San Francisco, and he's been a powerful force in Sacramento for issues around electrification and the movement towards meeting our climate goals. So please, a big Verde round of applause for Commissioner Hochschild. Woo! That's a good start. I like it. Next, we have Colleen Quinn. She's the Senior Vice President for Global Public Policy for ChargePoint. How many of you have ever charged on a ChargePoint charger? Raise your hand. Fantastic. Colleen just came back from a tour of Europe, 3 countries in 3 days, as she's working on building out ChargePoint's presence in Europe as well as across North America. She is covering the federal and all of the states for ChargePoint as she works on really establishing a public policy framework for how we build out the infrastructure of the transportation future. And I think she's got some really exciting things that she's going to tell you about today. So please, a big Verde round of applause for Colleen Quinn. Woo! Nice. You guys got a good crowd today. This is great. Next, we have Dan Richard. He's the chair of the California High-Speed Rail Authority. Are you at the right one, Dan? This is an electric vehicle panel.
We have an electric vehicle.
Yes. Fantastic. Dan has been with Jerry Brown version 1 and version 2, served in both administrations. He started his career in a little startup named NASA. And has basically worked in, it looks like, every agency in California government over the past 30 years. He's also a private consultant for energy issues, so he'll have his card ready at the end of the session. If you want to grab it, feel free to come up. And he's going to talk to us about what the high-speed rail is doing to plan about the integration of electrification and autonomy into their efforts as well. So please, a big Verde welcome to Dan Richard, Chair of the High-Speed Rail Authority. And last, we have Stephen Polonkronis. Fantastic. We worked on that. He's the regional business leader for a little nonprofit named AECOM. He's the line leader for transportation for Southern California and Nevada. He's been with AECOM for 19 years when they were just, 2 employees, right? Yeah. and about another 14 years working in the industry as well. He's worked on light rail, heavy rail, subway, commuter rail projects, design, development, finance. Do you have a favorite kind of rail? Love them all. Love them all. Love all your children. Exactly. So he's going to be talking about what AECOM. AECOM, of course, advises pretty much every government about transportation. And so we're really interested to hear what he's seeing and what he's worried about and where we're going to be going around transportation integration moving forward. So the loudest one yet, a big round of applause for Stephen Polonkronis from AECOM. All right, we're going to start with Commissioner Hochschild. Feel free to either speak from your seat or to come up here. And Colleen, when you do your slides, the same. I can either do them for you or you can do them, come up here. So, Commissioner Hochschild, where does this whole conversation of electrification and autonomy fit into our overall energy policy here in the state of California? And what did the governor actually say last week? Are we doing what we need to be doing? Is it fast enough? Where are we going?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to this revival, and good to be here. You know, it cuts both ways, because with that enthusiasm, I'm worried people are stocking up on tomatoes and eggs to throw if they don't like the answers. So look, I just want to begin by saying this transition to a clean, electrified transportation future is a transition we have to make. It will happen in the United States, but it will be led, the road to that runs right through California. And we need to think expansively about the possibility of this happening much more quickly than we had envisioned. I just want to begin. Raise your hand in the audience if you have an iPhone, all right? If you own an iPhone. So look, that's probably 75% of the crowd. That technology was invented a decade ago, okay? Last year, Apple manufactured their 1 billionth iPhone. Similarly, with clean energy technologies, California was the sort of global incubator for the modern wind industry, the global incubator for the modern solar industry. And by the way, we're winning on that. Last year, globally and domestically, renewables were about 65% of the new generation being added to the electric grid. And that's exactly the path we need to follow with electric vehicles. It begins with policy, but doesn't end there. The game is really to bring the cost down, and costs come down in 3 ways. There's innovation, automation, and scale, and it's mostly scale, right? And so the problem we have now is that the automakers are manufacturing actually terrific vehicles, but in very, very small volumes. And so the vision behind the governor's 5 million zero emission vehicle mandate was to get us to economies of scale. It's a combination. You think, well, what are the barriers today that exist? Why are people other than the early adopters, not buying zero-emission vehicles today? And it's the cost of the vehicle, it's the range of the vehicle, and it's the availability of charging, right? Those are the barriers, and we're doing things to tackle all of those. As part of this order, there's also a mandate to get to 250,000 EV chargers. So that's 1 charger per 20 vehicles. You need to make it easy. You need to reduce people's anxiety. I'm driving the Chevy Bolt. I bought that about 10 months ago. The Wall Street Journal called that the Prozac for range anxiety, because we're at this point now with a 240-mile range. We're actually, and it's affordable in the $35,000 cost range, where finally people have comfort with this. And what we need to do is just create the conditions to scale. One thing that is also going to be very important is exposing the public and introducing the public to these vehicles. What we're finding is almost 3/4 of Californians have never been inside an electric vehicle, right? And so one of the hats I'm wearing is I'm chairing Veloz, which is a new nonprofit with a bunch of stakeholders, including AECOM, as well as a bunch of the automakers and utilities and other stakeholders, to do a Got Milk campaign for electric vehicles. This worked when we did it during the energy crisis, the Flex Your Power campaign to get people to reduce consumption. It worked when we did it during the drought. And we're now at the point where this is what we need to focus on. Our biggest pollution problem in California is a transportation problem. And at the end of the day, we need to remember what we're talking about here is the health of our kids. It's about the health of our kids. That's the most important thing. And this transition also has a very nice nexus with what's happening in renewables. And I would take you back, okay, this goal, just think about this for a minute. We're 12 years out from the governor's 5 million zero emission vehicle goal, right? If you go back 12 years to 2006, where were we with renewables? Renewables were about 10% of our utility mix at that time. Today, we're at 30%, and we don't include large hydro in our definition. If you add large hydro, we're at 40% today, right? The cost went down. Solar power was close to 50 cents a kilowatt hour. It's now down to 3 cents, right? We know how to do this. And I really think the model for the electric vehicles follows what's happened with the renewables revolution. And there's a very beautiful, elegant nexus here, because when we design policies right to have like an EV happy hour, essentially, where vehicles are plugged in and charging from the grid when we have surplus renewables, it helps make use of that surplus renewables and helps integrate higher and higher volumes of renewables onto the grid. So there really is a benefit both ways.
Great, thank you. I'm going to ask him one more question, Colleen. Sure. Yep. And I'll ask each of you this question, so please be prepared. Commissioner Hochschild, what's the most exciting thing that you're seeing right now?
You know, to be honest, within the EV space, actually it's electric buses. And let me tell you why. Just this past year, 2 companies, BYD and Proterra, opened battery electric bus factories in California, and they're scaling. BYD's just hired 800 people, and they're ramping. But what's interesting is the value proposition for electric buses is actually considerably better than for passenger vehicles, because actually it turns out the maintenance savings are about $50,000 a year. Maintenance and fuel savings, about $50,000 a year. Think about a normal bus, you get it on the city, it is stopping all the time. That's a major brake pad replacement, right? With electric buses, there's none of that, because all the braking goes into regen. And so what's happening now is the typical cost of an electric bus is about $700,000. A internal combustion engine bus, diesel bus, they're about $450,000. So you have about a $250,000 delta, but at $50,000 a year of savings, that's a 5-year payback. And the bus has, their warranted life is 12 years. The actual life is much longer than that. And they're financing that. So they actually sell the bus at $450,000, and then they finance the delta. And so a company like Proterra, they have sales in 42 states now. And in states you wouldn't believe it: Arkansas, North Carolina, Texas, Florida. I mean, places that you don't think are hotspots for electric transportation. And the next thing they're going to go to is school buses. Why is that exciting? Well, school buses are plugged in actually most of the day, and particularly valuable for renewable integration. So I'm really excited about that market segment in particular.
Great. Thank you for those comments, and thank you for who was whistling. That's the kind of energy we want to bring to this panel. We appreciate it. Next, I'm going to bring up Colleen Quinn, and she's got a few slides to show as well.
Broke Mayor Nichols' rule.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she said she wanted what'd you say, a PowerPoint-free zone? Well, thanks, and thanks, everyone. It's an honor to be here. This is my second Verdex conference, and I enjoyed the last grouping, and this, I'm sure, already has become really interesting. People, topics, etc. Today, what I'm really going to talk about is to focus on, in some ways, the governor's goal of how do we get, well, my question is, how are we going to get to 5 million vehicles and 250,000 EV charging infrastructure sites in California? Talk a little bit about why I think at this point, why I believe we will get there. Secondly, kind of how we'll get there. Talk a little bit about the EV charging infrastructure market today, and a little bit of background, potentially, if we can get to it, about my company. I want to start by saying I started, actually, myself, same time Dan Richards apparently did with Governor Brown when I was a Coro Fellow in 1978. And I was told, I said, I'm interested in California politics. I was in LA. And so David Abel, who at that time was the executive director, said, well, then you know what, you need to be on a gubernatorial campaign to really understand what's going on. And so I was on Jerry's 78 reelection campaign, and then I moved to Washington to work for him in the state of California, Washington office. And then from there, I worked on his presidential campaign. I mean, that was many moons ago, but I was nostalgic in many ways to see him give his last State of the State address. But, you know, I was energized as well because he really went out with a big bang, at least as it relates to electric vehicles and EV charging infrastructure. The other thing I wanted to mention about the plan itself and about his executive order, which is, I think, unique. If you read closely the executive order, the role of the private sector is very important. So, for example, embedded in his message, he said, we must continue to attract and encourage private investment in, in this area, in electric vehicles. Secondly, he basically ordered the state to work with the private sector and private industry to collaborate and bring these solutions forward. And third, he also made sure that in that statement was embedded the recognition of the private sector's innovation and what they have actually brought to the success so far of EVs and EV charging infrastructure. I also had the honor to be with the governor in Paris, COP21, and I think what was unique about what he brought to Paris, he brought with him a bunch of, CEOs from Silicon Valley. And the message that he delivered in Paris was, yes, it's about the environment, but it's about the economy. And the success that California has had in really promoting these objectives that we all share as it relates to the environment and health and the quality of life. At the same time, though, it's not like saying, eat your peas. It's bring the most innovative products forward, bring jobs, enable this economy to move, and that was definitely the message in Paris. I was also with him in Bonn, and again, that I think is unique and important. So why do I think that we will get to the governor's goal, basically? In fact, I think we will blow it away, let's see, do I hit this? Is because the electrification of transportation is inevitable. And you've heard it today, I'm sure, in every way, shape, or form, but we're talking about on-demand mobility, we're talking about autonomous vehicles, we're talking about the electrification of vehicles, and frankly, this dramatic transportation, what we see today is going to be completely unrecognizable in the future. And one of the major drivers of that David suggested is because the costs of the batteries are going down so deliberately. I just had listened to Tony Seba's presentation on how does disruption happen, and how in many ways they've missed some disruption. He points to electric vehicles, and the three key issues are the cost curve going down, which it is. Secondly, the business models being successful. And I will say that that I'm very proud about ChargePoint is that our business model is basically an Airbnb business model. We don't own the charging infrastructure. We have essentially we sell it to our customers. They purchase it, and then we're also a technology company in that we develop the networked capabilities so that they can manage the asset on their property. But essentially, I think one of the reasons that our company has been so successful is because we identified that business model from the get-go. And so that's important, to have the right business model to scale. This whole scalable of this sector is really absolutely critical. And then the whole idea of the convergence. And the convergence that we're seeing is that, the clean energy convergence, the autonomous, the AI, the autonomous convergence, and also the transportation convergence. So essentially, the future really looks like this. Virtually every segment of transportation is going to be electric. And interestingly enough, at the core of that, actually, this whole direction towards autonomous is going to be, every autonomous vehicle essentially is going to be electric as well. And one of the things that I would say, and we didn't have Daryl here today, which I think would have been really interesting, but at the end of the day, competition to capture the future of electric and automated vehicles with investments in infrastructure is really heating up. And it's heating up from the point of view of municipalities. You're seeing, Daryl's not here, but my sense is I know he's got a very interesting project on how to bring autonomous vehicles to Sacramento. He's got his smart vehicle project as well. States like Massachusetts, I happen just recently to have been appointed by the governor there, first state in the country to create a commission on the future of transportation. And I would expect guys like Dan would be on that panel, but they reached out to an EV charging infrastructure provider for a reason, which is to say that, as Massachusetts maps its future for infrastructure investment, how do they make sure that they capture this? The National Governors Association has put together a group of governors led by the governor of Nevada to talk about innovation and how they're going to lead innovation in transportation. A lot of that, I think was generated by Elon Musk and his position in Nevada with the battery, the battery factory, et cetera. But, he's moving governors from all over the country around this agenda. Okay, one more minute. Congress is also, as you all will see, considering major infrastructure legislation. And one of the things that I would recommend, there will be a sector in this infrastructure bill that has to do with transformational technologies and investments. And what we've got to do, is we've got to organize around making sure that this future, this 21st century transportation future, is represented in the vision that comes out of Washington. Right now, I can tell you, I've met with members of the Trump administration and the DOT, and eyes are kind of glazing over a little bit. Now, the states hopefully are going to organize and move this agenda forward. I'm going to certainly work that through Massachusetts. California, of course, will do it as well. But there needs to be some impetus coming to take this vision and to make sure that the federal government, has an understanding so that as we move forward, we can make sure that we leverage public-private partnership money going forward. So thank you very much for your time, and look forward to more questions if you have any.
And what is the most exciting thing that you're seeing right now, Colleen?
Well, there's a lot of, I don't know, as you mentioned, I'm globally engaged, and I'm making my way into Europe. To be honest, you want to know the truth?
Yeah.
The most exciting thing is the revenue that's coming into my company. In other words, there were 5 people.
Right.
And I'll tell you this, 60% of our revenue when I started was from the government. Now, less than 3% of our revenue is from government. The excitement to me is that there is a market. There is this whole opportunity is scaling. Wall Street says it's $1 trillion opportunity in EV infrastructure. And it involves the utilities, and that's exciting too. The collaboration that's required here is important and happening. But yeah, there we are at that inflection point, and it's exciting, and that's what I'm excited about.
That's great. So if you have business cards and looking for
Yeah.
jobs, you know who to talk to on this panel. Fantastic. Yes. Chairman Richard, is the high-speed rail the largest transportation project in the country?
It's actually the largest infrastructure project in the country,
Wow.
not just transportation. And right now, we're looking at what is a $68 billion program over the next 15 years or so. And You asked the question before, why am I on this panel? Well, partly because David Abel is such a gracious guy, and when I told him that I had to go to Sacramento tomorrow, he said, well, we'll put you on the EV panel. So, and I've known Panama for a long time, and let me try to make this relevant to this, and I think it is, and actually the accident of my being added to this panel caused me to think about some things in a different way, which I think is good. So let me just take a minute or two, make sure everybody understands what we're trying to do with the high-speed rail program, and then I want to talk about how it fits into the larger transportation questions that we're facing here. So for those who don't know, the voters in California in 2008 passed a bond measure to kick off a program to build a ultimately 800-mile high-speed rail network in California. The first phase, 520 miles, would go from here in Los Angeles up through the Central Valley and into the Silicon Valley, Bay Area, and terminate in San Francisco, with later additions to San Diego and Sacramento. And after a lot of angst, and there has been a lot of angst and litigation and all those things, but today, and most people don't realize this, I could probably ask for a show of hands, America's first true high-speed rail system is under construction in the Central Valley of California. There's $3 billion of investment that's there now. As we're sitting here this afternoon, about 1,650 workers are working on 17 sites. 600 companies are involved. 400 of them are small businesses. 95% of those are California businesses. We have 45 businesses owned by disabled American veterans, and the poverty rate in the Central Valley is appalling. If the Central Valley were its own standalone state, it would supplant Mississippi as the poorest state in the United States, where 1/5 of all the children have asthma, and the poverty rate in Fresno is 25%. 1 out of every 4 citizens in Fresno is living in poverty. So we have made a deliberate decision to do the first investment into an area that's been heavily underinvested. And we're seeing just dramatic effects there as a result of it. The idea is that sometime 8 to 10 years from now, hopefully less than that, we'd open the first leg, Central Valley to Silicon Valley, and then ultimately connect down here. And but here's where I want to get to the larger question, and going back to what Commissioner Hochschild said. If we're going to deal with climate change in California, and his colleague Bob Weisenmiller said this during lunch, we in California are the flip of other states. If you go back east, what you find is that some 40–45% of their greenhouse gas emissions come from the electric generation sector, and about 20% comes from transportation. California, it's the opposite. Partly because of longstanding policies driving us towards cleaner energy, partly because we always had the hydro plants and so forth. And then I heard the Edison guy today say we're down to about 19% contribution from the power generation sector of greenhouse gas emissions, and we're still 40-some% is coming from transportation. So the only way that we will be able to deal with the greenhouse gas challenge is to attack the transportation sector. And I've been thinking in terms of, there's something in the telecommunications world that was known as the Negroponte switch. And I can't remember which of the 2 Negroponte brothers, one was a diplomat and the other was at MIT. It was the MIT guy who in the 1980s said, television is delivered over the broadcast airways. Telephone service is delivered over landlines. There will be a switch, and the one will transform into the other. And I think we need that similar type of switch today, which is that basically liquid fuels have powered our transportation networks. And we need to essentially, as was said, we have to essentially electrify the entire transportation sector. As my friend David was talking, all of a sudden I had this great idea for a marketing thing, which we're so good at marketing at high-speed rail. It was just, we really suck at that. I mean, it's just, we've got a great story to tell and we don't tell it very well. But, it occurred to me that in the 1950s, electric utilities like Edison were promoting the gold medallion all-electric homes. Everything in your home was electric. Your stove, your stovetop, everything was electric. We're going to have a gold medallion all-electric ride. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, and this is where we need to get people thinking about a future that basically electrifies the entire system all the way. And if you get off high-speed rail and an autonomous vehicle comes up to pick you up, it's electric. If you get off high-speed rail and you get on a bus rapid transit line, which they're building in Fresno, it's electric. If you drive your own car, it's electric. And you get on a train that is electric, and you go someplace, and you get on BART, which is electric, and so forth. And I think this is something that is very possible, and it is a vision that we should try to really achieve. We've committed at the High Speed Rail Authority that 100% of the power for the train will come from renewable sources. And I think you've already heard from the commissioner the essential link between these electric vehicles and our renewable energy goals because of the basic nature of the renewable energy resources that we're looking at, which have intermittency. We can have 5 million, essentially, storage batteries for our excess wind and solar production if we can find a way to harmonize those together. And so I think we're a big part of that. I was telling somebody last night that one of my favorite quotes is from Wayne Gretzky, the legendary hockey player who is known as the Great One. And people looked at him and said, well, Mr. Gretzky, what makes you so great? I don't know how you answer a question like that, but he said, well, if I'm great, he said, what I would say is that most people skate to where the puck is. I try to skate to where the puck is going. So the key for those of us in policy-making positions is to skate to where the puck is going. So for example, on the High Speed Rail Authority, where I created a transit land use committee because I'm very concerned about making sure we have density and connectivity around the stations, I raised a provocative question: why in the world would we build a parking garage? By the time that we build a parking garage, the combination of the gig economy, autonomous vehicles, and so forth is going to make that a very horse and buggy kind of approach to access to the transportation system. So I would just say, I'll end with this. One of my proudest accomplishments, I spent 12 years as a member of the board of the Bay Area Rapid Transit System. And I got off of there in 2004, so I only say that because I wasn't responsible for what I'm about to tell you, which is that, a former legislator, Lloyd Levine, who's very active in the EV sector, called me up and said, there are no EV charging stations at BART. I said, you've got to be kidding me. He said, no, and BART says they have no plans to put them in there. And I said, that's just insane. I mean, why would you not be able to charge your car at a public transit facility? So this is all about thinking broadly and systematically. And I started to say one of my proudest accomplishments was when I came in, the high-speed rail program, and people often talk about, the controversial high-speed rail program. There is no high-speed rail program in California. There is a rail modernization program in California, of which high-speed rail is now, thanks to new direction under Governor Brown's leadership, is part and parcel of a broader move that includes investments, whether it's in LA Union Station, upgrading the corridors, systems like BART and Valley Transit in the north, and so forth. And what we need to be about is looking at our entire transportation system, moving towards a full electrification of the transportation system, giving people all electric rides, and it just so happens that ours is going to be faster than some of the others. So thank you.
And the last question there. What is the
am I-
most exciting thing that you're seeing right now?
Well, I've had the chance to think about that when you asked the other two participants, and so I have a ready answer for it, which is the most exciting thing in my mind is the mainstreaming of this technology and this idea. The governor's announcement was treated with enthusiasm. You didn't hear people, say, on the other side of the aisle standing up with skepticism. You didn't hear people attacking it in that way. They saw it for what it was, as visionary. So this governor, I think, has always had his finger on the pulse of where the public is, and has always known just how far he can get out in front of them without getting too far out in front of them. And so the fact that he, in his own judgment, felt that this was the time to throw down that challenge. Meant that he knew that people would accept it. And so I think he had a very good sense of that. And you know, once you set out a goal like that and the public buys into it, as Californians, I mean, we meet those time and time again. So to me, that's the most exciting thing.
Great, thank you. All right, Steve. So you get hired by some of the top government agencies in order to be able to help them figure out how to move their people. And so you probably are seeing, you're on the front line of the challenges that we're facing as we're looking to incorporate all these different and bring together, integrate all these different modalities and thinking about infrastructure and the flow of people and goods. And so could you tell us what you're seeing out there? You know, what are the challenges that we're facing? And then I'd love to hear about some of the bright spots that you're also seeing and what gives you hope in this space.
Thank you. So I think from our perspective, you can lump it into three big challenges that this change that we're seeing is bringing to us. And I think of them as revenue, capacity, and competition. And on the revenue side, it's pretty straightforward. As Colleen has proven and the commissioner talked about, electric vehicles are happening quickly. The technology is both here and also evolving very rapidly to improve capacity and range. And one can see very quickly the full autonomous and connected piece of it coming together as well. And what we see is I'm not even going to call it a long-term, but maybe a medium-term revenue challenge that we have for the road infrastructure to support this revolution. If you look at the actual fuel revenues that we get from our gas tax, which is the primary way that most of the country funds road improvements, it's either been just about flat or falling in some states and some regions. And yet the number of miles traveled has not fallen commensurately as well. Now we're lucky here in California for some things that I'll talk about in a minute in terms of revenue that we've taken a different picture, but nationally the trust fund has been insufficiently funded for, I think, the last 5 or 6 years. And so the ability of states and localities and the federal government with the interstate system to support continued construction, continued improvement and maintenance of roads needs to keep up with this change. And that means that we're going to have to start to have some very serious conversations about switching the funding model from a fuel model to either a road user charge or maybe a kilowatt hour charge. I'm not sure what the answer is. And some states like California, like Oregon, have been looking into this, but at this point the conversation has been kind of inside the bubble, and we need, I think, as policymakers and folks who are in this business to start pushing that conversation into the broader range of the public realm because we simply aren't generating enough money. I'm not talking specifically California, but nationally to support the road system. The other thing that I think is that we need to worry about and come up with policy approaches is the question of capacity. As autonomous and connected vehicles become more popular, I think people can see a future where folks are sharing cars, and maybe the reduced cost of being able to share a car means that you're using a car more often and moving away from transit. And while the autonomous connected vehicle is going to create capacity because of efficiency, eventually we'll use that up. We know that because every time we add a highway lane, it works pretty well for a while, and then people move off the secondary roads onto the highway, and as states grow and municipalities grow, that resource becomes, that capacity becomes used up again. And so we're going to have to think hard about our capacity of our roadway system if, in fact, that shift gets made. And then I suppose the third one is very closely connected to that, and something that's sort of near and dear to my heart, which is competition for the public transit system, and maybe a reduction in broad political and popular support for funding transit. which is a very efficient way to move people. And I think what the transit agencies need to do, and some are starting to do, is find a way to combine with the ride-sharing apps to address the first and last mile challenge, that is getting from your home to the transit station, from the transit station to your work, so on and so forth, or school, or what have you. And we're starting to see some of the systems. Metro is starting a microtransit pilot project here to kind of put together a traditional bus system with an on-demand app, but in a more efficient way by combining more people into maybe a smaller bus or van thing, but still having some of those on-demand features. So I think those are three big challenges, and I wish I had the answers today as to what the solution was, but those are, I think, three big challenges that we need to start to discuss and describe to the public at large as this change is happening. Otherwise, the policy, I think, is going to fall behind the technology, and we're going to be scrambling to address some of the challenges that come with this terrific technology, but it comes with its own sets of challenges.
That's great. What's exciting?
I think what's exciting is, at least in the medium term, particularly here in California, is folks' recognition that there's no free lunch. You've got a significant number of counties in California, with a few exceptions, that have voted sales tax measures to support transit. And so that's funding that comes in that's independent of the fuel tax. You've got a courageous governor and legislature that voted in a change to fuel taxes, both for trucks and vehicles, and for electric vehicles for the first time, having a modest charge that comes with the vehicle registration to help support this infrastructure. So I think there's an awareness of the importance of the fact that there is no free lunch and that people have to pay for this. And so that's exciting to me.
That's great. Commissioner Hochschild, I saw a little LED light go off over your head at some point during
So
Stephen's
you mentioned
comments.
ride-hailing, and one thing I wanted to highlight, not all electric vehicles customers are equal. So me, I just bought the Chevy Bolt, exactly my 1-year anniversary having this car was yesterday. I drove it 10,000 miles. An Uber driver working full-time, or a Lyft driver is driving 50,000 miles a year, okay? So actually, it does a lot more good, because the goal is not just electric cars purchased, but gas miles avoided. And so it's also, I think, a great way to expose the public to electric vehicles. We're finding, 3/4 of Californians have never been inside an electric car. So I think one policy area of great opportunity is, how do we increase the penetration of EVs among the ride-hailing apps? And if you look at, whether you have a mandate like an RPS we did for renewables, or whether you condition their operation permits based on some level of EV penetration, or whether you work with them to offer higher compensation for drivers driving electric, we have to start that conversation. The roads in the Bay Area where I live are clogged. There's a lot of these drivers, and if we're not focusing on the ride-hailing community, we're missing a big opportunity.
I just want to jump in to say that you could take a page out of the Mayor of London's book, who's basically mandated that all taxis, and that includes, it's going to include the Ubers and the Lyfts, have to be electric by 2018. And it's very exciting. We have a partnership, for example, with InstaVolt, which is a big DC fast charging. The other part of that, David, is that you're going to have to plan for things like charging hubs. And, the level 2, the round town charging that really my company built its business model on is, you basically, the way people charge their cars is, 80% is at home or at work, and then they charge around town. That's what the market looks like today. If you introduce fleets, buses, heavy-duty vehicles, scale, and things like the autonomous, we really have to think about this differently. The parking garage will go away, at least as we know it today, but there needs to be ways to actually share with, for example, you would basically almost have a contribution of, you'd have a Lyft on one floor and a Uber on another floor, and you'd have a multimodal hub potentially in a region that kind of fits Dan's vision. And what's interesting is that I think the funding for the level 2, the kind of the around town, pretty much is going to take care of itself. The private sector's leaning in, et cetera. But the real challenges, I think, for government and the opportunity for government is to really look at this multimodal hub type environment, plus the hyper-fast DC fast chargers that are coming out. That's going to help the Lyft and the Uber driver be able to actually have, more time on the road that they need to have. So but all that infrastructure and the way that it comes together, number one, it requires collaboration with the city, with a technology provider like us, with the shared vehicle companies, et cetera, and the utility, because there's going to have to be a whole boatload of electricity that goes into that place. So, those kinds of things are still TBD. And that's really, I think, the opportunity even as the governor and as the Energy Commission starts to look at, we've got this, $2 billion fund in front of us, and what should we be focused on? And I think that is by far and away could be the most constructive, future-proofing opportunity for government, because government brings people together, and this is a complicated set of problems that have to be solved in order to get to the scale and the support of the lifts and where we want to go, the buses, et cetera.
Steve?
And I'm hoping Colleen won't stab me with her pen when I talk about this technology, but one of the things that I think I know we're working on now that's really exciting, I think, for the transit bus and maybe the Uber drivers, is we're starting a pilot project with the Colorado DOT right now to do an induction charging system where the road literally charges your car as you go, which for a transit bus or an Uber driver could be a real advantage, but with considerable infrastructure costs to install it, obviously.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
I mean, we'd be for that, as long as they have the smart charging infrastructure and network, making sure, the other part of this equation I think that we've discovered is really important, at least in EVs, is that it's a good experience for the driver. Putting it in the ground and digging up putting the funding behind it is one thing. But if you can't find the car or the charging station, you don't know where it is, you don't have the right technology and network capability to reserve potentially a space for yourself, know exactly what you're going to be charged, have the folks that are running the charging station also have the capability to manage. That's the key. As a company, we'll work with anybody in any we're not wed to a level 2 station with 2 ports or a fast charger, because the future is, who knows? We've all got to be thinking about that, but there are certain elements of it to make sure that the driver experience or the customer experience is successful. That's going to be critical for adoption.
This was a no fluff panel right here. You heard from 4 real leaders and visionaries, and listen to that tame applause over there. You just had, I got to give it up for David. He put together, I think, each year Verde Exchange gets better and better. And this year is an amazing lineup. And this panel you just heard from is a perfect example of that. So let's let all those folks know the kind of panel that you just experienced by giving a big round of applause for this panel. Thank you very much.